very warm welcome to all of you. Very warm welcome to Dr. Rukmini Banerji, Dr. Pramath Sinha, Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan, and also Ashish Dhawan will be joining us very soon. Just to share some context with you, we are in the nationals round of the governance challenge. And for this inaugural year, the anchor state in the governance challenge is Haryana, and the anchor domain is human capital. And we have in the audience, we have 26 campus winners from the top 26 campuses across the country who are joining us as audience here. In addition to them, we also have other students from these campuses and some young professionals joining who may not be visible as part of this setup here. And they've been making presentations to a jury yesterday and today, and basis that 6 teams would be selected who will be pitching their solutions to the Honorable Chief Minister of Haryana on the 1st of October in the TGC summit that will happen in Chandigarh. So that's where we are in the entire journey. For the audience, I think when it comes to the domain of human capital, I couldn't have hoped for a better panel than what we've been able to assemble here. I think some of the foremost leaders in the ecosystem when it comes to different parts of the value chain of human capital. Let me try and introduce them. I'll start off with Dr. Rukmini Banerji. She's the first name that comes to anyone's mind when you talk about education, school education in the country. All of you would have heard about the ASER survey. She's the one who's really brought it to where it is today and headed the ASER Centre for a very long time. She also leads Pratham Education Foundation, and is also the recipient of the Yadan Prize, which is considered to be the Nobel for education globally. So really welcome Dr. Rukmini Banerji to the panel. And then we have Pramath. Pramath had a long stint at McKinsey, post which he was the founding dean of ISB, played a seminal role in getting the institute to where it is today. He's a founder at Ashoka University and really is shaping a lot of high quality private universities across the country, from Ladakh to Ahmedabad to Mumbai, Pune to Chennai and so on. So really representing higher education on the panel here. He also is the founder of Harappa Education. A lot of you would have come across Harappa in the last couple of years. So welcome Pramath to the panel.
Thank you.
Then we have Dr. Gayathri Vasudevan. Gayathri kind of has been able to solve one of the most complex challenges, which is really doing skilling and getting people to be employed basis that skilling. She's kind of the founder of LabourNet, which does this at a fair scale, one of the few entities which have been able to crack that puzzle, and also heads the Sambhav Foundation. So welcome Gayathri to the panel. She's representing skilling and employment linkages. And we have Ashish also. Ashish has joined us as well. Ashish was the founder of Chris Capital, one of the first successful private equity entities in the country. And he moved out of that when he turned 40, set up Central Square Foundation. Central Square Foundation again played a seminal role in getting foundational literacy and numeracy to the center stage of the government agenda, and is now a key cornerstone of the new education policy. And the CSF supports foundational literacy and numeracy mission across more than 12 states in the country. Now Ashish is also heading the Convergence Foundation, which is a foundation that aims to incubate a lot of social enterprises in the coming years in the country. Ashish is also the founder and chairperson of Ashoka University. So as I said, we have a perfect, as good a panel as we can have for discussing the problem and the challenges and the solutions for human capital in the country. I'll start off by putting a common question to all the panelists. We often talk about demographic dividend that India can reap. We have a young population in an aging world. But a lot of people also say at the same time that if we don't harness our youth appropriately, that demographic dividend can also turn into a demographic disaster. So the question is, what according to you are the biggest human capital challenge we are facing as a country today? And if you were in the position of authority, if you were the education, skilling, employment minister put together, and you were given a free hand, what would be your approach to addressing that challenge? And we can, maybe Dr. Rukmini Banerji can start, then Pramath can come in, then Ashish, then Gayathri, but the same question for all of you.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. So if anybody on the panel stands for elections, you will be the chief propaganda officer. Okay. um, I think that this is probably the biggest question facing India today. And how we tackle and solve this question will decide more or less the destiny of the country for the rest of this century. So I want to just refer back, just for the sake of getting the conversation going, that every year, or and now of course every other year, we do this. We do the usual ASER survey, but in 2017 we did a special one which was focused on the age group 14 to 18, which I believe is a neglected age group in India, because you either want whatever's happening to the younger age group just to move higher, or you try to plug in some solutions that work for maybe an older age group onto this age group. And it was a very interesting exercise, and I think one of the most eye-opening ones for us. And I want to just summarize what came out of this, looking at this representative sample of young people. So think of 4 big buckets. First one I would say is aspiration, of what do young people of that age group want to do. And there were of course variations across the country, but one thing that came through sharp and clear, whether you were in Nagaland or in Kutch, was that many young folks in this age group wanted to join the armed forces or the security forces of some type, which gives you an understanding of why we had so much violence and unrest just recently over the Agnipath issue. So lot of aspirations for being in kind of white collar or security forces type jobs, but along with that, no clue about how to get there. I'll put in the chat, once I'm finished speaking, a little film that was made following 4 youngsters across the country, which really brings home this, that मुझे पुलिस में जाना है, but मुझे आइडिया नहीं है मुझे करना क्या होगा, और मेरे जान पहचान में भी कोई है नहीं जो मुझे बता सकता है कि मुझे करना क्या है. Second was what the activity that they were engaged in at the time. So 85% of this age group was enrolled in some kind of educational institution, but partly because they didn't know what else to do. And 40 to 45% of these kids, alongside with being enrolled, were helping with whatever the family business was, which also they didn't really want to do. So time is being spent in activities that are taking up your time, but actually you don't want to be there. The third one was, of course, this awareness question, not just about what pathway you want to go down or what options may exist, but also very simple things like, getting some basic things done. How do you go and, find information? Have you been, how do you know how to operate your bank account, ATM, things like this. And of course, it was 17, so we asked a few digital questions, but they would be even more salient probably today. And the final question, of course, because we are ASER, was on what is your current ability to not do just reading and math kinds of things, but to do everyday kind of calculations. You want to go and we tried many things at that time. For example, what is a real reading task that you have to do that can make, a big change in your life? One was, can you read the instructions on, the oral rehydration packages? And can you actually execute that? Things like that. Lots of calculations, simple discount, simple interest rate. And as you would think, if you projected the ASER report, great deal of difficulty in doing this. And a final point I would say is something that we don't see in the usual ASER report on schooling and learning, because we focus a lot on the younger age group, that boys and girls seem to be doing more or less similar. Here in the 14 to 18, big and increasing gaps between what boys and girls could do. So these 4 pieces and its complete misalignment, I would say, is one of the major challenges that we face. And how do you bring them all aligned? And it has to be aligned not just with each other, but aligned downward. So if, finishing 12th standard exam with a proper grade is the entire goal of the last 12 years, but you don't know what you're going to do beyond, then perhaps it is that those kind of gatekeeper points that we need to probably start with, and then work out what happens below and how do you increase all kinds of capabilities and awareness as you go along. But let me stop there, because this issue has, I feel, captures a lot of what happens ahead and what happens behind. And I would love to hear what, everybody else on the panel has to say.
Pramath, you want to go next?
Uh, Rukmini has set up the challenge so beautifully, and I have no answers because I think this problem obviously gets exacerbated by the fact that we have to do this at scale. And I have been saying this now for some time. One of the things that is very humbling as you work in the sector is that, all the models that we use, the idea of a classroom, a teacher, books, were built for the time gone by. Now, if you look at roughly 25 million kids being born every year and surviving and going on to live a life, I don't think these models were designed, even though they are called mass education models, they were designed for mass at this scale, to solve for challenges at this scale. So I think that's the only nuance I would add to what Rukmini is saying, to add some context to what I'm about to say. And therefore, I personally feel that while the current models are going to obviously be there and they will help us, we need a very different model to do all of these types of learning, whether it's foundational learning or 14 to 18 or skilling, and there the only, my limited mind can only say that technology and blending in technology, or doing only technology where blending is even not possible, is the only answer. And I don't mean to talk about technology as it stands today, because I think technology as it stands today in education is still very in the stages of infancy, if I can call it that. All we have done is replicated the old model in the digital world, and we're trying to make that work and claim victory. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a fundamental shift in how do you deliver learning, how do you actually make opportunities and careers or guidance accessible to everybody. Because as Rukmini just pointed out, it's not just about teaching somebody, it's also about telling them what to do next and where are the opportunities. So I think technology is going to play a very important role, and we haven't quite cracked it. And I think that's the big opportunity for us in India, to actually crack it for us. Forget the world, forget what's happening in the rest of the world. We have enough of a challenge and opportunity here to crack the technology challenge and make something really unique come out of create some really unique models for the future. I think the second thing I will say, and I'm obviously coming at it from a higher education perspective, 25 years ago was when we created ISB, and I know that there's several MBA students here. This is the only program I know in the world that isn't accredited and is as popular and is as impactful in terms of getting people jobs, which is what people typically look after an MBA. It is accredited technically, but not in India. We can't give degrees. I think that trend has grown even further today. Harappa just got acquired by Upgrad, and I see people going to Upgrad and taking certification courses just because they know that's all they need to get that next job or that next jump. So I think we have to bust this myth, at least at the higher education level, that only formal 3-year, 4-year degrees are required. And therefore, you want to go in the police, you don't need to go do a bachelor's or a master's. There's another pathway. And we need to obviously create, educate, socialize those pathways, and lots of changes need to happen. But that's the other opportunity I think we have to say, listen, if we have to cater to the demand and there is a lot of supply available, how do we completely change the way we educate, the formal education, to make these opportunities more accessible? I'll stop there for now and add more later on.
Yeah. Just one follow-up on that, Pramath. In some sense, Harappa was an attempt at both of these elements that you're saying.
Yes, it is.
Technology being leveraged to kind of impart, and secondly, going outside of the formal course structure and do that. But as you did that for the last few years, what's been some of the things that work and some of the challenges that you foresee will need to be overcome to actually do that at scale? It could be just...
Yeah, I think it has worked for the believers. So when people come in with belief and faith, and because I would like to admit that we have good intent, then we are able to work well in partnership and deliver impact. When people come in skeptical and they are not quite committed and they don't really know, they don't really put in the effort, it doesn't deliver. And by the way, this is the same problem that we've always had in education, haven't we? One of the professors, deans of ISB, used to say that, it's wrong to think of students as customers. Of course, I don't think we should think of students as customers at all. But he used to say students and institutions are actually co-producers. He was a business school guy, so he would use that. And he would say that, students are the raw material. They are like the iron ore who you are converting into steel. Unlike iron ore, which is inanimate, you have to make an effort to convert yourself to steel alongside the help that the institution is providing. So I think it's really that mindset. When the student comes with the mindset that I'm going to learn from this platform, come what may, right? And I'll show up for every class. I will do my homework. How do you motivate people to be that way online is, I think, the big challenge. Aside from all the other stuff around content and the right pedagogical tools and assessments and so on, I think getting that motivation right. In the school model, we solved that by saying, come to school at 8 a.m. Right now, you're trapped inside. That's the first thing you do, right? So people show up, and then you have these classes, and attendance is marked, and you can not pay attention if you stay in the back seat, and that we can't assure, but at least you are in the room. So similar things have to be done to assure the commitment. But back to you.
Over to you, Ashish.
So Gaurav, I have a completely contrarian view. I think that we're looking at the wrong side of the equation. In India, the real issue is job creation, not skills. Frankly, this whole skilling mission is a failure because we haven't realized that. I think there's much made about the fact that our students are not ready, we don't have the right skills. I think the market will solve for all of that if we can create jobs. The classic case is you look at the IT industry when it took off, right? 5,000 engineering colleges mushroomed within a decade. And good, bad, ugly, the companies developed their own training programs. And we solved for it. The jobs were there, the people showed up, they got hired. So I think we're looking at the wrong side of the equation. We don't create enough jobs. I'll give you a few examples as to manifest this. For instance, if you look at labor-intensive exports, China's global market share is 38%. India's is 2%. Out of India's exports of 420 billion, less than 20% is labor-intensive. The jobs are in textiles and garments, electronics, footwear, leather, furniture, toys, sporting goods, all of these labor intensive. We missed the bus. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity again to get onto the bus because China is in the penalty box and wages are higher right now in China. So we need to grab that. If you ask me, I think more than focusing on skills and even more than the PLI, government should focus on an ELI, employment linked incentive. Focus on, there's no lobby. Every time I go to a CII meeting, somebody is lobbying for automotives or renewables or all these industries where India already, or pharmaceuticals. But there's no spokesperson for these labor-intensive sectors because largely we don't have much representation here already. There are other industries like, construction. We got our policies right around affordable housing, urbanization. We could create 20 million additional jobs. By the way, there are 100 million labor-intensive export jobs in China right now that will leave China in the next decade. Affordable housing policies, etc., and if you spur that market, that's 20, 30 million jobs. There's a bunch of other service sectors where jobs can be created. So I think the issue is job creation. Our people in India are willing to work. The youth are willing to work really hard. And if we can create more jobs, people will show up. And the clear manifestation, why do so many people apply for Sarkari jobs that are available? I mean, it's partly, of course, these are plum, lifetime annuity streams. But partly it just reflects the fact that there's a lack of jobs. Otherwise, why would people, show up for these openings? So I think that's where we need to focus. As far as our people or our youth are concerned, I would say 2 or 3 things. So one is foundational literacy and numeracy is still important for the reason, Rukmini mentioned. You still should be able to read the instructions on a ORS packet or there's so many things in your daily life, apart from your job, that you encounter, where basic math and literacy is critical. So I think it's still a fundamental building block for the workplace, for living a life as a productive citizen and meaningful life. A second is soft skills. I think most of our folks lack soft skills, and prioritizing that is important. And third is just professional skills. I mean, part of the reason why, and I'm not talking about for this group, but if you look at at the low end, part of the reason why, China is so much more productive is people show up on time to work, when they're at work in an if you go visit a Foxconn factory, I've been to these factories in China, and you walk by the assembly line, people don't lift their head even to look at you. They're doing their job. They've created dormitories to make it more efficient, easier for women to work, etc. So I think, there's that work ethic and professionalism is a third thing. And I think for women, we need to solve for certain other things. I think there are certain barriers, including, I think again with women, it's largely a job issue. There aren't enough women-friendly jobs. We haven't created the jobs. And by the way, labor-intensive exports will, 70-80% of those jobs will be for women. And then you need the enabling conditions of an environment where there's transport, safety, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, that's the real issue. We can keep doing all this skilling, but it's really a job creation issue more than skilling.
I'm hearing that the solution is in the finance and the commerce, this thing, as opposed to education skilling and higher education skilling and employment. But Ashish, I'll come back to FLN and the other points you raised. But just on employment generation, what's the model for employment generation for India? Right? Is it a more China kind of model, like you're saying, very, very repetitive stuff? People are just trained, people are disciplined, and you do it at large scale and you supply it to the world. What's the India model of employment generation that's likely to work?
I think you have to go to where the job opportunities are, and where, firstly, as an economic growth model, to prioritize an economic growth model which leads to a lot of job creation. It's very easy to grow by building oil refineries and, people talk about these green jobs, but I can tell you the new green hydrogen facility at Reliance is building is not going to employ too many people. Most of our manufacturing industries don't employ that many people. Bajaj Auto, 30 years later, has fewer employees than it did earlier, even though it produces many more motorcycles, right? So I think we need an industrial policy, firstly, that prioritizes job creation and incentivizes it, both export-oriented and domestic. It's great for taking labor off the farm at the lowest end. If you look at TVEs in China, town and village enterprises, which worked on basic production, it was the first way to take people off the farm, and 200 million people were employed by TVEs in China. So I think we're talking about structural transformation. We need people to move out of agriculture into industry and services. That's really what we're talking about. And to create more jobs, because we have lots of women who are not participating in the labor force, right? So one is to expand the pool beyond 500 million. It should be eventually 700 million, the labor force, 750 million. And then how do you do structural transformation where more people get off the farm? And for that, you can't run away from the fact that the real jobs are in export-oriented labor-intensive manufacturing, low-end services, construction being a very, very big one, potentially tourism, if India can ever get its act together, because there's lots of jobs there. Lots of low-end services. Again, as you create more consumers, low-end services will explode. So I think that's where the jobs are. And so the economic, it's not a China model. You can call it the China model, but any country that's grown rapidly has prioritized exports and has had a policy where they have prioritized job-intensive growth. So those are the countries that have moved up into true middle income, not just lower income, but even escaped middle income into developed status. Because otherwise, you have a problem where you can't carry most of your people with you. It's not a skills issue. It's not a skills issue. These are such basic jobs that you don't need any fancy skill. And by the way, you're better off making the skilling investment when the jobs are there. So I would say we do need to fix it. It's like what happened in the IT industry. Get the jobs and then fix the skilling ecosystem at that point. Otherwise, you're wasting your money.
Gayathri, do you agree with that? What's your view on the overall problem as well as all the thing that Ashish is saying? That it's not about skilling, it's about jobs. Skills will follow.
So, in a sense, I've always believed that. I've never believed that, the skilling that we are doing is the right thing that we are doing. Because I think, like Pramath said, we have replicated school education for skills. I want to be a bit cautious in my statement because the group I deal with is largely 18 plus. So when you look at it, they are adults who have, who are where they are, whether they have educational competence or not. I'm not coming in there, but I think where we are intervening. So the sectors that Ashish said are some of the sectors that we've done considerable work in. For example, the construction sector, the leather are two sectors that I'm fairly well aware with. So these are sectors, if you look at it, I think there's been an enormous amount, at least in the construction sector, where technology has come. It is in my opinion, one of the fastest transforming sectors. Automobile and construction have been sectors where there is a lot of technology which has come in. But it still has a lot of jobs. But I think the whole thing is that if you need to look at the jobs which are higher end, when I'm saying semi-skilled jobs, they actually pay very well also. However, I think we've never been able to make the link. So nobody in education, if they are in education, and I say this, for example, anybody who's in 9th to 12th, for example, would not even know how much you can earn there. So we've not made that connect. For example, we do a lot of payrolling in construction, as part of apprenticeship. Many of the people earn close to 30 to 50,000 rupees per month. Of course, it is task-based work, and therefore you have to, calculate it and move forward, etc. But I think the whole challenge is that. The second is these industries teach on the job. Because of the fast-changing technology also, they have to, what is required is learning capacity. Now, learning capacity is where I think skills is important, is that you need to understand where it is dexterity, where it is following of instructions, because even the smallest mistake there will cost. And we see that in our construction, right? The mistakes are more because one is not able to follow through on what is said. The between the architect to the engineer to the diploma person to the contractor and worker, you see a significant fall in just following instructions, and that I think is comprehension, and to me that is functional skills. However, I'd like to say one other thing is that when we are looking at skills, there is a basic skill which is required. And that is possibly the most difficult for one to impart. And that should be, in my mind, in schooling system. It should not be additional to it. It is something you develop along the way. We cannot suddenly inject a 2-month or a 2-day or a 3-month program. I am not a big fan of that form of skilling in a sense. The other thing I think is if we look at where jobs have come in, I mean, a classic is the logistics sector, right? It has really opened up jobs. Across the country, you have, warehouses. Earlier, it was only manufacturing clusters, but today you have warehouse clusters. As I walked into this meeting room, I was hearing somebody say Jhajjar. Jhajjar is a classic warehouse cluster. It's going to have some of the biggest North India warehouse which is there, which means the kind of jobs which will come in there will be every cluster, which is a significant cluster. I don't want to say all clusters, but I think about 1,000 manufacturing and today warehousing clusters in itself will employ a lot of people. So if we focus our efforts on where these clusters come in and focus to say what has to happen, I think will be important. The other things which I think often is lost in this translation is, where do workers come from? So largely they don't come from the local area, other than urban services which are like jobs which are taken for the interim purposes. So if they're coming from outside, infrastructure, transport, all matters. And when you have to build a cluster, there is an investment from the state which is needed. For example, electricity, water, roads at the minimum. I'm not even bringing in schools and health, but I think at least these three are important to come in. So I think if we are able to fix that, and skills has to be embedded in the jobs. So that means whatever jobs that are there, how are you fast able to have the pedagogy and the ability to teach what is required. And I'm just going to spend a minute on an example. For example, every one of us is ordering Amazon products. Possibly the most ordered products are in the mobile phone category, small appliances, if I may call it, and then the other will be your TV screens, etc., to a lesser extent. Now, if somebody has to go and install small things to teach, those will be important skill sets where you need physical plus digital. So at all points, I think for us to be able to transcend physical and digital will be important. A purely digital learning may not work completely. A purely physical modality today may not be sufficient. So our skills ecosystem is actually, the problem is we are replicating the school ecosystem and hoping it will solve for the problem. And the penalizing is happening at various levels, to people who are not job creators. So job creators have to come first. Education needs to be strengthened to bring in these skill sets. So, what Rukmini said, those are problems we have to address. Everywhere you go, either they will come with that, or very recently I was in Punjab, everybody was talking of English education, right? IELTS, because the idea is to go abroad. How do you broaden that scope of, where are jobs there, what are salaries available, what is considered to be soft job versus a hard job? Yeah. I think is important for us to solve for.
Yeah. Coming on that, back to you, Dr. Banerji, NEP provides that framework to address a lot of these challenges. That's what it's supposed to do. And by and large, everyone that I speak to feels that it's a good framework. Now, what will it really take to translate that into action? It's a mission state. It's a policy document at the end of the day, and getting it translated on ground is a different ballgame. What do you see? What will it take to do that? And what are the biggest challenges that you see in that process?
So I think, we are talking about a huge range of things here, but if I break it up into smaller bits, there is clearly a push that is happening on these early years, on what they are calling the foundational stage. You can see a lot of effort going into that. Some states are in a preparation stage still, some states have brought it into implementation. Now, it's a very interesting thing because, as Pramath was saying, 25 million in each age group. So if I take age 3 to 8, about 150 million. India's future will be settled based on in the next 5 years what you do with this 150 million. So if you're going to do a bad job, let's start preparing for it right now, because there's no point when they're 15 to be having the discussion that we are doing.
Yeah.
It's critical that this, at least this chunk, has a completely different future than previous generations. Now, what is the nature of that task? Today, if I look at today, or I shouldn't take today because we went back a little bit last 2 years. But if I look at 2018 ASER data, all India rural, which is not very different, frankly, from urban, less than 30% kids are at that foundational literacy numeracy grade level. Less than 30%, which means 70% are not going to make it academically anyway. They are going to go into the unorganized sector like they've been doing, right? So what to do with that lot, has to be thought about. To go from that 30 to 100 in the next 5 years, we have to turn the country upside down. And it is not going to happen inside the classroom alone. It has to be something that every Indian must feel that agar ye nahi hota hai, to mera desh ekdam barbaad ho jayega. And we are seeing, I think partly COVID has helped. There's been a huge parental support, but you have to know what to do to build this foundation. So I think that is one kind of challenge. I personally believe it is solvable because they're here, the gaps are not that high, but you've got to get out of the classroom and you cannot depend only on teacher training and whatever assessment and all this kind of thing to change the world. Okay? It needs to be a much bigger mission. If I move slightly up, and I kind of pick strands from what all the other three have been saying, I think you have to recognize that a lot of learning happens outside the book and outside the school. We have no habit within our school systems of any group work starting early. I was having a side conversation with Makin, who's somewhere on this screen, about the fact that you can't suddenly become an entrepreneur. You can't suddenly become a job creator. You have to have some practice from quite a young age of doing things in groups which may be very dissimilar, coming up with projects that you complete, picking up projects that you as a group actually really want to do. And maybe some of this in a later stage will lead to having the self-confidence to be able to tackle certain things. So we have our entire education system is focused on that 30% who's going to make it and on individual excellence rather than on the group average going up and the variance going down. Because we have our systems are driven by totally different values. The implicit values teach the front of the class, let the 10th standard exams be good, and then mera bacha college chala gaya. On the job side, just if I add a little bit, that I look around and yes, there are industries which have to expand and so on and so forth. But I don't think we are really, because we don't lack the group behavior practice from early in life, I think are ignoring a lot of opportunities which are there locally. Now, if I look at, just because I don't know much about the higher sectors, but I look at midday meals. Now, midday meals, every village is done by women. Usually by the most disempowered women who are working with very little resources. Same गांव में आप देखिए कि जब भोज होता है तो who makes that? It is done by men in the same village. Now, any school that has 100 children is likely to have at least 1,000 people in that village. What are the opportunities for this group of women who are cooking every day to be transformed into something that can be quite competitive in the village market in terms of food production? So these are just examples to say that if we want to think that we are going to have to be job creators, my family is going to have to think, because that organized sector job बहुत कम लोगों को मिलेंगे, and maybe increasingly so, then what is it that I have to do from my young children onwards to make these pathways possible?
And that's an interesting thing. If we're talking about localization and local jobs and not really having to depend on the organized sector only, picking that bit and a little bit related, Pramath, for you, the question of language. How do you really impart high quality education in Indian languages? And is that really required? Do you believe in that? Or you feel no, there is English education which is important, given the organized sector is kind of getting there? What's your view on language education, including in the higher education spectrum, not just a foundational, which is part of NEP and so on?
Listen, I'm least qualified of the four panelists to answer this, but I can only answer you by saying that, listen, there are certain certain categories of roles and jobs where obviously English is going to be very important, and we can't deny that. If you're looking at that level of aspiration, then you need that. You need some basic level of understanding of English. But on the other hand, I'm a big proponent of the vernacular language myself. I look at what we do in Ladakh, Gaurav, and I think that is, maybe I should just speak from my own experience, and rather than give you theories. The fact is that in Ladakh, we have people go through this program for a year. The Ladakhis' language skills are very poor when they start out. We actually have a writing center for them. We have a writing center at Ashoka also, where we are making English speaker even better English speakers and writers. And we have a writing center there which works at a very different level to improve their overall communication skills. And you will see Rukmini was the convocation speaker at one of our convocations a couple of years ago. And you see remarkable improvement in people's English communication skills. But what they all say is that the improvement is in their thinking, not so much in their English. And I think that's the crux of it, at that level at least, to make these people more employable, as well as to make them more employment generators, which is the focus there. I think it's just helping them become more confident and then be able to think things through in a systematic way and execute on them. That has made the huge difference at the Naropa Fellowship. I'm totally where Ashish is, and I think, you and I have been brainwashed in this at McKinsey. We used to do study after study about employment and India's GDP and the macroeconomic picture. And so that's what we've been trying to do at Naropa, where we said, in the ecosystem of Ladakh, can you train people, educate people, and get them to create businesses and jobs? And I have to say that it's a very small experiment, and I confess that there's huge challenges of scalability. But it's remarkable what these kids are able to do, right? So the barley soup I drink at home, the apricot jam I eat, the shawls that I give as presents, the chocolates that I order, the pesto that I put in the pasta at home. I mean, I'm giving you largely food examples, but this ties back all the way to the agriculture system, the barley, the teas, and the other sort of condiments that they are supplying from there. And a group is supplying fresh fish, Himalayan trout. And so people are building these businesses, and people are actually funding them. Tesh Agarwal from Oyo is funding them, and several social venture capitalists are funding them. So I do think that it's language, it's confidence, it's the power to think things through, and giving them the inputs that will require them to become self-sufficient, which have made all the difference.
Thanks, Pramath. I want to move to the audience question, but before that, two things for you, Ashish, very different ends of the spectrum. One is FLN, and we talked about how that's the most critical thing to solve for. My question to you is around the how of it. The need for it is established, the importance of it is there, but now really we're at that phase we really have to crack and make it happen. So what's the how of it in your view? That's one for the audience. The second is, you talked about job creation. Pramath just now was speaking about almost self-employment, right? Being able to entrepreneurship and self-employment. How big a role do you see that playing in this economic development, job-led economic development, not jobless growth, but growth with jobs?
Yeah, so I think Rukmini pointed out beautifully in terms of the scale of the problem. 150 million children, in that age cohort of 3 to 8, the 6 years. And I think a lot of people don't realize it, versus I think the numbers dropped to 24 million kids born in India last year. In China, it's 10.6 million, less than half India. Nigeria is at 8 million. Pakistan, 6 million. Japan, 800,000. Italy, 400,000. I mean, there are literally almost 100 times more children born in India than in Italy every year. It's 60 times more. So I think it's really this, what we do with this cohort, as Rukmini said, that will determine the future. And so I think FLN is critical. Organizations like Pratham over the last quarter of a century have shown us the way. My own view is we need to build very strong political salience, that this is really, really important. The way Rukmini put it, that if we miss the bus with these kids, these 150 million kids, it's not only the future of India, it's the future trajectory of the world can change, because it's such a large cohort. It's 20% of all kids in that cohort globally. I think the how is really been shown by Pratham, Room to Read, LLF. There's so many organizations that do fantastic work. And really, I think all the state needs to do is pick up a lot of the tools developed by these wonderful organizations, the methods, and really imbibe it into the system. That muscle has been missing in the past, where right under their nose, they can see Pratham doing amazing work, delivering results, or Room to Read in a district showing amazing results. And yet it's never gotten absorbed into the system. And I know organizations like Samagra are playing that role. So I think the how is really about building the salience, and then really whether it's and ultimately it can't just be governance fixes. It has to be change in the classroom transaction. I think we have to start bottom up. As too much work in India is top down, fixing data systems and things like that, which is not going to lead to any change in the classroom. And I think that's what makes it really, really hard. As far as the jobs are concerned, I mean, it's a mix. Look, we do know we have a very large SME sector, which is all largely self-employed. And so self-employed will be a very large part of this mix. 63 million enterprises with like 100 and some million people employed, very subscale. I think the SME sector in India has been very constrained. And I don't think most of the nano entrepreneurs are not going to grow. This is just one person enterprise or two people. But finding the ones that are like 5, 10 plus and having them scale, I think is where, and then of course, new entrepreneurs coming in, a different breed, who not the fancy ones that we hear about that raise billions of dollars. They're not going to create lots of jobs. But the entrepreneurs who get into the labor-intensive sectors, right, and start enterprises which employ 50 people, 100 people. Some of them will scale up, which require very little capital. And that capital, by the way, is not available because all the capital goes towards what I call the fancy enterprises. And we need that. But if we take the money that's being wasted in the fancy startups and just put it towards this, we create so many more jobs, many multiples of what we're doing in the current fancy startup ecosystem. So I think entrepreneurship, the SME sector will play a key role in this job creation engine going forward. Exports will play a key role. Housing policy and urbanization policy will play a key role. If we can increase tourism, that will play a key role. I think those are some of the places where the job growth will come.
Thanks, Ashish. I'll now move to questions from the audience. I'll request Pritish from Kautilya School of Public Policy to ask his question to Gayathri.
Thank you, Gaurav. I think Gayathri ma'am answered that on the side, but my question was largely around what Ashish sir mentioned around you should focus on employment and market will take care of the skilling itself. My question was largely around the socio-emotional paradigm and not just the economic paradigm of skilling. And I'm not sure if employment alone will be able to pull that for students, and why shouldn't we focus solely on the socio-emotional paradigm of the skilling in that sense, like harmony, peace, etc.
So, Pritish, as I said, I think that is part of school education. In my opinion, that is the thing I think where Rukmini also started off with, where we need to bring these under, simple. When you say socio-emotional, you need to break it up, right? It could be resilience, discipline. These are skill sets which are taught in very, very incremental manners. so that you are able to really bring it in. And that's why I believe that school education one needs to strengthen. Second is, like, we often do not look at learning life skills in school education. When we are thinking of life skills, we have actually brought it down to simply saying communication. But communication in what? How do you look at your neighborhood? How have you kept things clean? If there is a seepage in your school, are you maintaining it? If the drain is not there. So these are all part of that, which falls under socio. Under emotional, as I said, could be resilience, discipline, because today jobs are not lasting for more than 5 years. So if you look at the plus 18 cohort, every 5 years they're changing sectors. Because there's a lot of it is physical jobs. That means you can't do it beyond 30, 35, right? So that means you are actually going to change your sectors. And if you look at everybody in the 18 to 30 at the front line, they're working in 2 sectors. You just take any, a loader will often also be a helper. Like this, you will have, a domestic worker will be a beautician will be a tailor. They will have without even agriculture. I'm saying in the services sector itself. So I think it's very important to bring it in there, and it needs to be done systematically. Today, what we have done is we are bringing it in as hourly. 20 hours of digital skills, 50 hours of entrepreneurship skills, 20 hours of English. If you keep plugging it like this, education itself gets, you're actually creating chaos. You're not creating systems. And schools, therefore, or teachers, therefore, are not able to plan how they have to deliver. They'll do everything else, and it is instruction-based top. I think that needs to change.
Thanks, Gayathri. Pramath, I'm paraphrasing a question in the chat window for you. Is there need for more institution building, higher education institution building in the country? Or how do you really will that solve for it, that you have the best-in-class examples and then you kind of create almost role model institutes? Or how do you really spur higher education at scale? The point that you were earlier also making. How do you really do this at scale is the question, technology being one part of it. But you also see a way that physical spur institutes across the country. How would that happen? And then Rukmini can come in with her thoughts as well.
Sorry, was that a question for me?
Yeah, that was a question for you.
I mean, I think some sort of a blended model of creating lots of different hubs where students can come in and get all of these. I think the university, so many acreage, so much square feet of space, you need to own it, all of that needs to get completely busted. And you've seen that in the coaching centers, right? The coaching centers have done a great job of building a national network. If you want a JEE coaching, NEET coaching, all kinds of other, that has really grown. So I think a combination, YouTube channels are doing an amazing job of training people for state government job entrance tests, right? So I think a combination of using these types of free channels, sophisticated learning technology, as well as creating hubs in areas where people can go and get guidance, access skills, work on projects, the part that Rukmini was talking about, maybe in their own cluster of villages and schools. I think all of that needs to be brought in place. And I know it sounds like a lot, but that is the only way that you'll be able to do this, is creating these clusters. In the new education policy, for example, the government has talked about creating clusters, but they're talking about creating clusters of large universities. And not to say that they don't have, they're not saying the right thing, but I think you need a very different kind of cluster from the old university clusters.
You're talking about more quota kind of clusters.
Yes. And if there's a job engine pulling that train, and if there are entrepreneurship opportunities pulling that train, then I think people will go to those places.
Yeah. Rukmini, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, actually, if I can ask a question, that we have these, world-class universities, but it's been very curious to me, and since there are two absolutely leading lights of our higher education on this panel, why we've never really adopted this community college kind of a model on large scale in India. Because it looks like, this combination, when I look at these the data that I was citing, that you're studying, but you're studying something that you don't want to, and you're also working. The combination of these would fuel very well while you're working, you can also study kind of a model. So I don't know, maybe it has been tried in India, this community college after school, or even during the high school years. Pramath or Ashish, is that a way that could combine something?
Yeah, I mean, a quick answer is that it has been tried and badly executed, and then we gave up. But Ashish, I don't know if you have a different.
Yeah, I think Pramath knows this better than me, but I think that there is a space for this, Rukmini. And firstly, our system needs to recognize what was recognized 50 years ago, which is the Carnegie classification, that there are really three kinds of universities. There's the research universities, which are very few in number. I mean, even in a country like the US, it's 200. And in India, again, it'll be the top end of the food chain, where 5% of the students go. There are the technical, universities, the mass engineering colleges, etc., where another 20% of your students will go. And then 75% really will go to these community college. They're really more vocational in nature. And all the norms that we have apply across this whole stack. And I think if you recognize that every institution, these three archetypes are radically different. They are radically different. I mean, in that third archetype that I agree completely with Pramath, you need blended learning at scale in that third archetype. In archetype one, the research university, it's all about, as an undergraduate, you go to campus and first time away from home, and you're developing future leaders for India. So I think if we changed our policies to recognize that third archetype is very different, the rules that UGC has, all of that should be scrapped completely, and a new set of norms should be applied to what does certification mean, granting degrees, etc. And grant degrees, not just some skilling certificate, these people. I think that would, to some extent, lead to a flourishing of these new age, very innovative community colleges, largely driven by the private sector, who will make a profit. And I think let them make a profit, to be honest, as well. I mean, which all of them will, they'll find a way to do it differently. But my view is that there's a big opportunity there, because our colleges don't serve, even out of the enrollment ratio of 26-27%, it's really that bottom half who are not being served well, or that bottom 60-70%. And they need a new archetype of institution to serve them.
If I may quickly add, Rukmini, a lot of the young people who are going out of the country, even as we speak today, are actually going to these so-called community colleges abroad. So, for example, Canada has become a big deal these days, where you just go do a 2-year some diploma, right? Because the rules there are now that if you do 2 years of any education, you get 2 years of work permit. So you can go to a community college in Canada, and since I'm familiar a little bit with the place, people come and ask me all the time about these Canadian colleges that I'm sure you and Ashish and Gayathri have never heard of, or people on this call. Just today, my CFO's niece is going to Canada. A 17-year-old girl is going to study computer science in Kelowna, British Columbia. I'm sure none of you have heard of Kelowna, British Columbia. I'm trying to find somebody to pick her up because her parents didn't get her visa and they are, really anxious. How is this 17-year-old going to go to Kelowna? Now, that's what people are doing. They are actually going to the equivalent of our ITI in Patliputra colony, if you remember, from Patna, Rukmini, which we always thought was a defunct institution. But it was there even in our times. But nobody went there because it was run so badly. So I think we failed in that, and we haven't really rebuilt that, which is what the plan should have been.
I'll next request Shubham Sinha from IFT to ask his question. I think he has a question for Ashish.
Good evening, sir. I have a question to Ashish, sir. Like automation and digitization right now causing disruption in each and every sector. So as India being a labor-intensive country, there will be unemployment after the implementation of digitization. So how India is prepared to deal with this problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what that trajectory will be over 20, 30 years, but I think it's often overstated. I think there is a real issue in some manufacturing industries that automation will take over. So if you look at there's this case made that with labor-intensive exports, India, it's too late for India. But I mean, if you look at the way garments are made today, it's still done by hand. You need people. Or electronics, it's still assembled. Maybe someday a robot will do it. But my only point is the next 10, 20 years, while the escalator is running, ride it up to the next level till the escalator stops, right? And the bulk of jobs going forward will be in the service sector. And in the service sector, human-based interaction cannot be replaced. AI at best can assist a doctor, a teacher, a nurse, a caregiver. It cannot substitute. So I don't subscribe to this view that AI will kill jobs. It will kill jobs in certain sectors. It will lead to a greater, hopefully it will give people, I always believe that people who are in the business of human face-to-face services do great work, and because there's empathy involved, there's really taking care of the customer, whether you're in tourism or education or health, and they don't get their due, and maybe they will get more of their due in an AI-driven world, because those jobs cannot be replaced by AI. So I think there'll be some job destruction, but work on the farm, work in services, work in certain types of manufacturing, that's still not going to go away. And for India, by the way, the next 20 years, the escalator is still running. So I don't think it's as relevant an issue in the near term.
Gayathri, you want to add something?
I'm going to add that, automation has normally resulted in jobs. If you look historically, right, you take any of the transitions which have happened. Electricity as a transition. At that time, there was a huge hue and cry saying every person who was putting candles actually lost a job. When we moved from horses to automobile, there was a lot of worry that we're going to lose jobs, but it created jobs. So typically what has happened is there will be different kinds of jobs, and probably for the better. Now I'll give you another example, right? Take construction itself. You always had this whole vision of somebody carrying bricks on the head. Now in any large site, that is not there, because there is a trolley system which has come. And this has happened in the last 15 years. It's not even like, it's not a very long time back. There was a lot of celebration of that flower hat, which women wear in, which we call the LNT hat, for women labor. But you don't need it anymore. But was it the right thing to carry bricks on your head? You don't need to. There are other methods. So I think automation will result in loss of poor quality jobs, and possibly result in jobs which we are not aware of. So our intent needs to be not to run away from automation, but historically, I don't know what will happen next 30 years. Historically, it doesn't stand the test of time. We have always had better quality jobs because of automation.
Thanks, Gayathri. And I think we are also running out of time now. We can continue on this topic for endlessly, basically. But it's a broad topic, but I'm glad that we've been able to touch upon some key aspects within the human capital puzzle as part of this discussion. I'll now request all of you, all the four panelists, to just share one parting thought for the talent, for the audience in this session today. They're all kind of in their doing, all of them are actually doing their masters in the best campuses in the country. Somewhere they have this thing to contribute in some shape and form to nation building. So your final thoughts, parting thoughts for the audience. We can go in any order.
I can quickly say that I'm sure you'll come up with lots of wonderful ideas. And maybe I'm taking a little bit from what Ashish would have said, but we both always say that, as young people who are just entering whatever field you're going to enter, please think of solutions that can be scaled up. It's not that we are only saying do things at scale. do things small also. But the real challenge in our country is our numbers. And if the best people in the country are not applying their minds to how do we solve for things at scale, then I think nobody will. So I would urge everybody to not only do their own thing, but also really think about how do you solve for this, for some of the challenges at scale. Thank you so much for having me.
Gaurav, if I can go next, since I have a lot of higher education institution kids in front of me, I'm going to put out something that I've been saying to Ashish and Pramath a lot. They don't listen to me, so maybe these guys will. I agree, you think for the country, education minister, wo badi baatein hain. How about if sometime as part of maybe a initiative like this, take 10 villages, 20 villages or slums right next to your institution and think about what you would have to do to solve this puzzle. Because I think that feeling this sense of responsibility about how do I design, and potentially the institution can even implement the pieces that we've talked about. Not everything can be solved at the same time. But I think that if higher education institutions, rather than thinking of big policy, could think also of a local implementation, and especially the premier institutions of the country, you're all management people, I think that would bring a lot of new thinking also into this.
Gayathri, Ashish.
Gayathri, would you like to go?
I was actually thinking, under the NEP, there is something called capstone. I've always thought to myself that's the most interesting, and I've been reading about it. But I think sometimes it's important for you to immerse yourselves. Possibly, you will enlighten organizations, be they government or social enterprises, but you will also learn. And I can tell you, I saw a comment from Makin saying that he likes the earn and learn model. I think I have personally benefited from that because, oftentimes the place of socio-emotional learning comes from immersion. So immersion is so important for us to keep in mind what is around us for us to make changes. I think Gaurav started with a statement, if you were the minister, and I was thinking to myself, thank God I'm not. Because we don't know that position, we don't know what it entails. But what is clear is what would you wish to do if you can implement it. And I borrow from Rukmini there, but I think it is there in the curriculum at least. It calls it out. If we are able to design well there, I think we'll have a lot of empathy and possibly solutions which will transcend time.
So Gaurav, my feeling is, and there's never been a more exciting time, despite the doom and gloom one hears about, to be a young person in India. I'm very, very bullish on where the potential that we have over the next 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, if you look at the changed geopolitics in the world, I think India will benefit tremendously going forward. And I think we will truly grow at 8-9%. I know there are many people who don't believe it over the next 20, 30 years. So I think as a young person, you have the best opportunity in front of you, better than what we had, at your age. And so you should be optimistic in your mindset. You should be very hardworking. I think, we may criticize the Chinese for a lot of things, and right now they are definitely in the penalty box. But they made it to where they are through hard work and diligence. So I think there's no substitute for hard work and perseverance. I think being pragmatic, just commonsensical, is really important. And having an entrepreneurial mindset, So this is India's moment. You are the folks who are going to carry us forward. And I think that you should do everything possible, work really hard, be entrepreneurial, and just have this belief that you can pull it off.
Thank you. That's a very, very good note to end the panel on. And I once again want to thank all four of you, Ashish, Pramath, Gayathri, Rukmini. I know all of you are super busy. It's never easy to find time, but you took time to be part of this. And thanks a lot for your insights and guidance. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for inviting us, Gaurav.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good luck to everyone.